We talked about sound, now we're going to talk about recording, because people wanted to record audio, and no one had any idea to do it. And really, what happens is that necessity is the mother of invention, right? And the mothers are the ones that invent necessities. Like, you have to. So what happened was, there was Morse Code. A lot of signals were being sent back. They'd strung copper wire in the 1800s to be able to send messages to other cities because the captains of industry wanted to be able to communicate faster. They had long copper wires going out, so only one signal could go one way at this particular time. You know, somebody would be keying it. I don't know what I just spelled, but if it's bad, I don't care. Sometimes the person on the other end was not as good as the person sending, and it was too fast for them to understand what was being said, and they have to say, "I'm sorry, can you repeat entire message?" Okay. Some point the boss of the Morse code system is like, "You're taking too long holding up messages, and they cost $20 a piece," or whatever. Sometimes you had no choice but to deal with someone that couldn't understand the Morse code as fast enough. So they asked Thomas Alva Edison, mean old man. They asked him to figure out if they could record Morse code with this. So he figured out a way that he could record the dots and dashes on this little cylinder of metal. He would turn the crank, and a needle would make an indentation on the roll. And every time you played it back, you could play it slower, so then you could hear the dots and dashes. And brilliant invention, right? As a side thought, he said, I wonder what happened if I put like a little piece of metal on there and I spoke into it. Would it record my voice? He said, "Mary had a little lamb, its fleece was white as snow." And then he played it back, and he's like, whoa! And guess what idea he came up with? No! He thought it would be a great way for people, like bosses, to make dictation to their secretaries for them to type out the letter. Eureka! I found it! A way to record voices from executives who need to tell secretaries what to type. Oops! Because somebody else thought, hellfire, let's put a recording on this thing. Here, Butt, come in here, we're going to sing a song. And somebody else put a song on it and started selling tons of copies, and Edison was like, okay, first the light bulb, then didn't get it on some recording device. So then he decided to start a recording company, and there's all these little cylinders made out of some kind of material that turns really brittle, fragile. It just breaks, okay? Just breaks. And that was called the Edison cylinder, because no one else wants to be blamed for such a stupid design. I'm talking about shipping and packing. It had to be in a box, it had to be carefully packed and all that. And, they didn't have UPS to kick things around back then. So they didn't have today's sophisticated, automated, thoughtful processes to screw up the packages. They had a wagon and a train. Okay? Okay, how many things got broke? A guy in Germany named Emil Berliner, thank you. Berliner does not mean donut, okay? And in this particular case, Emil Berliner made the flat record, okay? Right? And then they went around in a spiral like this. And Edison immediately goes, bad quality. Because out here you're going fast, and down here you're going slow, same rotating speed, but the size of the circle's smaller, so your linear velocity is a lot slower. And he was right. Quality gets worse as you get toward the inside track. Whereas the Edison cylinder here, which looked like a toilet paper tube, and the grooves are going around it this way, and it's playing. So it actually keeps the same horrific quality the entire time. So what Emil Berliner did was figured out how to make something that sounds much better most of the time, but Edison liked his that was consistently, tragically awful. Oh, I should play a little recording. Right here. Do it now. All right, flat record. So Emil made the flat record and got Edison all upset about it. He also invented the microphone, just to set things straight. Edison has been given credit. Alexander Graham Bell has been given credit, but the truth is that Emil Berliner invented the microphone. So what did they do? How did they record this way? Well, you remember I told you that he put up like a little flat piece of metal, this cylinder, right? And there was a needle sticking on it, and it would etch whatever vibrations happened to it. He would etch them into this almost like tinfoil. It's like real thinking. If you think of like very thick aluminum foil that didn't have a seam, maybe that is a thing, but it was super smooth. Anyway, the idea is that he put a little diaphragm here and spoke into that, and the needle wiggled back and forth, or properly more actually up and down, and recorded either a deeper groove or a shallower groove, which is called hill and dale recording. Welcome to Hillendale Recording. As the vibrations of air are doing, just so did this little part here, because this air would come down here and push and pull the diaphragm. If you don't believe me, put your hand up in front of your face and go, ah, and you can feel it. Let's hear one classroom member do it. Participation is strong. Here, if you hold a piece of paper, it's like, If you touch the paper, you can feel it vibrating with the waves off of, your bad breath. That actually records little wiggles physically in this tinfoil kind of material. Then you just put the needle back over here, and this time you crank it again to play it once more, and now the needle is wiggled by the grooves that it cut, and that vibrates the little metal plate at the top, or whatever it's made of, and then that pushes and pulls air and plays back the audio. So it was physical recording. So the first recording was physical recording. You've seen pictures like this one where you can see that there's musicians sitting close to the recording device. So they have the violins up front, and then you see the loud people, the trombones, everybody's in the back, and they're on a bleacher, and there's this big horn at the front, and they're all trying to focus their sound down to the horn. So if somebody was too loud, the conductor would kind of move them further away. So mixing was done physically by moving someone who's too soft closer to the recorder. Oh man. So physical recording was the age of the day, and there was really no way to duplicate these very well. So at the beginning, they would hire a singer, and they would have like 5 machines or 6 machines, and he would sing the song into 6 of them at a time. Then they would put fresh things on. He would sing again 6 times, right, into 6 machines. So in a day, a person might be able to produce, 100 or 200 cylinders, but they had sung the song many times through the day. So they were not exactly the same, except for those 6. So they didn't have a way to replicate the records until later, when Emil Berliner's flat record was able to do so. So in the Edison days, so he wound up having singers sing all day. They would be paid a flat fee and got no royalties. Of course, somebody changed that eventually. All you have to do is, if you're a singer and you have a lawyer in your family, you're probably going to be okay. So physical recording. This was the first way to record. The second was that people wanted to figure out how to record stuff that would last a little bit longer. People thought that maybe what they could do was, if they could amplify it somehow, they could make it louder. Because there was other people doing research about sound, It wasn't only cranky old suspender-wearing fat bastards in California. I'll probably hear from Thomas Edison's family, right? Let them come over. I'll electrocute them with AC power. That's just a reference to the dogs that he killed, okay? So the next thing was, they wanted to have some kind of electrical assist, or electricity. We're not talking about magnetism, we're talking about electricity. Electricity. All right, so they want to convert it into electricity, okay? They were trying to figure out a way to boost this somehow or another, because they had other ideas, They decided that if they had a way to generate electricity, because they'd already seen that electricity could be generated, and they could even change the kind of electricity that came out of it. Some of them could put out DC power, and some could put out AC, alternating current. It changes polarity back and forth. Get this straight now. DC is like plus and minus on a battery, okay? And AC changes back and forth, and it usually is signified by the sine wave. What a sin it is to not have sine. AC, it doesn't have just plus coming out and minus coming out, so to speak. It changes. It would be like if you took the battery out and kept flipping it back and forth, so that it would be plus and minus, and then minus plus, and plus minus, and minus plus. And yes, the electrons, so to speak, let's just say that the energy, the current, would flow in one direction, and then flow in another direction, and flow in another direction. That's related to Tesla, because he did power generation that would travel better, because it could be put into transformers and boosted back up to a higher voltage again, but DC can't go through transformers. More on that later when we discuss isolation circuits, which is, I don't know, about 32 lessons away from here. So there's DC, direct current, and AC, alternating current. And, if you could, let's say, attach, a Sharpie to a molecule of air that is out in front of me, and I'm speaking, it's going to vibrate back and forth, right? So let's say I could draw a strip of paper under there while I talked. This would be the little pen moving back and forth, because it would actually do a trace of its waveform. So that if you could plot out how that molecule moves back and forth, or even, say, the circular disc of Edison, right? If you could trace out how it's vibrating back and forth, if you could attach a little sharp wipe, drop it, to the end of this right here and pull a piece of paper by it, it would trace out vibrations. And that would be an exact replica. Okay, not exact, but really close. It would be an analog. It would be an analogy. It would be a copy of the way that the molecule moved back and forth and the diaphragm moves back and forth. So that's your waveform. So now that's what the needle traces in here, these little grooves that wiggle back and forth. In this particular case, it was deeper and shallower, but eventually they figured how to make it go this way. Waveform, okay? They thought, well, we know a couple of things. In the meantime, people had discovered things about magnetism and electricity. Then if you take a magnet, north and south on either end, and you wrap a coil of wire around it. Now this wire is insulated and it's not touching the magnet. But let's say you just wrapped it around a tube and you put a magnet inside the tube, and then you move the magnet back and forth. It generates electricity in the wire, okay? So the magnet is moving back and forth, and let's say it's moving back and forth 50 times a second. It will induce a current in the wire. So you out of here, you won't get plus and minus out of there. You'll get stuff that goes plus, minus, minus, plus, minus. You'll get AC. When the magnet goes this way, you might get positive out this wire. When it goes the other way, you might get positive out of the other wire. And the electricity is a perfect model. Okay, not perfect, but really close. A very, very good model of the waveform. So now we have generated the sound. Remember, audible vibration of energy traveling through a medium as a wave. I got them in a different order. It still says the same thing. You got energy going through the air. And it's not the air moving, right? I mean, that's called wind. But it's like little molecules out there. One bumps this, one bumps this, one bumps this, one bumps. Okay, I want to see closer. Okay, bump, 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 bump. Okay? And that's the way it does. So the molecules kind of stay in the same relative place, but the energy passes through them. It's like when you make the little ripples in the water's not moving out there. If you put a little float out there, like put a little, fishing float out there, and you watch it just go up and down with the waves, while the waves go underneath them that way. The water's not moving, but energy in the water is moving. It's like a wave of energy. It's like they get squeezed together a little bit, and you can't squeeze water a whole lot. Who says hydraulics? Hey, anybody in shop class knows this. Hydraulics is incredibly powerful. Water doesn't compress much at all, so that energy wave is transferred right through it. That's what makes tsunamis. You have a big motion down on the bottom of the ocean floor, and it gets over toward the edge. Then all that energy is so big that it can't be contained down in the water anymore, so it starts rising up out of the surface. And by the time it gets to zero, it's like this tall. You have a tsunami and you're out in the middle of the ocean, it'll go by and it's like a 1 foot wave. But it'll be big. It'll be like a long time. You'll lift it up and you're like, what the fuck? After 10 minutes, it might go back down again and you're like, what is that? That means tsunami. By the time it gets to the shore, it'll be, 50 feet tall. So movement of this magnet inside of a coil of wire induces current. We know this will happen because that's how an alternator works in your car. It has magnets that spin around, and then there's coils around them. And those magnetic fields are going. And when the magnetic field goes by the wire, it actually tries to pull the electrons inside of the wire with it. So the physical kinetic energy is being turned into magnetic waves, and then that is turned into electrical energy by induction of a current into the wires. So that's just the way it works. You move the magnet back and forth, and coil of wire will have a waveform just like the way the magnet moved. So what if you have a guitar string out here, and the guitar string is vibrating? Then it's pushing and pulling against this magnetic field without this magnet moving, and that induces a current into the coil again, and there you go, guitar picked up. So it produces an analogous form. I mean, analog means continuously variable value. It's not decimals, it's not points, it's not steps, it's not fractions. It's just an absolutely smooth curve. It's kind of like the old car stereos. You can turn them down and turn them down and turn them down. But now when you go down, you go like click, click, and then you click it, and the first click, it's already too loud. Okay, that's not analog. That's a digital stereo. So analog, just like air, strings, vibration of a reed and a clarinet, anything. This is analog. It's producing waveforms that are absolutely, they're smooth. They don't have little steps inside it. No matter how far you zoom in, you're not going to see any steps. Think of it as like postscript for sound. So analog, continuously variable value. So if the air moves a little bit, the waveform can be very, very accurate. The magnetism that would be induced here, the magnetism that would move back and forth on these wires would induce a current, actually an actual current. And of course, a current has two things. It has a voltage, which is really small because sound is not a lot of energy, right? I mean, you could yell at your hand all you want and it's not going to sunburn it. Or you can just go to any any festival, put in earplugs and get up near the speaker cabinets. And you'll feel your entire body just like, world looks fuzzy. You can look down at your shirt, it looks like it's like, blurred out into like 50 levels, because your whole body is just moving with the subs. I've seen them do it. I've also seen them do it without earplugs, and the last concert they went to where they really felt good. This whole idea of getting an analogy. Analog, see, is the root word of analogy. So what's an analogy? You make an analogy and it's a story that's kind of like that. It represents it, right? So we have a voltage and we have current, which is measured in amps. We don't have very much voltage or amps coming out of a coil like this. Not very much at all. So it has to be made bigger. That's called an amplifier. Next thing we want to do is we want to see how we can turn audio sound into electricity that looks like it. So we know that this could happen. So what they did was they basically, let's flip it around the other way, okay? Instead of doing it with a magnet inside of a coil of wire, because magnets weigh something, let's do it instead with a moving coil, okay? So now we've got a magnet that is fixed in place. And then out here we have a coil of wire, and it's attached on the back of a round diaphragm. So the coil actually moves, the diaphragm actually moves with the coil. Same thing happens though. So now this is moving coil, this is moving magnet. Out of here comes, if the sound is pushing the air, if the waveform is like that, then that one's going to come out the same way. If the electricity is going to be an analog, a perfect, okay, not quite perfect, but like a very, very nice smooth copy of what happened in the air. See? So now we've got something here, all right? The last step of this particular part, this lesson, has to do with what they used it for. And you tell me that the technology doesn't advance power. Let's see now, who was the most favorite Twitter user ever? Well, it would have been Hitler. Yeah, just telling the truth. All right? So, someone figured out they could take this waveform and they can make it bigger. For example, let's say that you have a garden hose, all right? You got a garden hose and there's a knob on it right here that controls the flow coming out of your house, okay? And here's the water coming out, all right? So you could turn that knob up and down, and the way you're moving it, like more or less, doesn't take but a few ounces of pressure. But what's coming out at the end of the hose, let's say it's a fire hose, it could be hundreds of pounds of pressure. So you're taking your few ounces of pressure and making a copy hundreds of pounds. So how does that happen? Well, you've got a gate you're letting the water through. And there's pressure on that water. So the more pressure, the bigger the pipe, the more water is going to come out. And it will be exactly in analog, a perfect copy of your increasing and decreasing the flow through the hose. All right, well, I do the same thing with electricity. And they had invented things called vacuum tubes. Guitar players know what tubes are. So there's something like this, and then there's a grid and whatever, and then there's like something over here, I don't know. I think it's this one, Anyway, there's a bunch of electricity, just raw electricity coming in is DC. And then right here is a control, which is that small signal that comes out of the microphone. So it's just opening up and closing, the thing for the hose. It's just, right? And what comes out is a big copy of it. So this was a tube. In the UK, they call them a valve. Well, because tube is the subway, right? See? It all makes sense. All except for Branston's pickle. Really weird stuff. It doesn't taste as bad as Vegemite. All right, so a tube. Now, they did the same thing with a transistor, okay? Transistor, a little bit later, same kind of thing. It has a key like this, and it has, like there's a plate. There's kind of like what they call the base. And over here they have the emitter, which is kind of like, it's kind of controlling the voltage here. And what comes out of here is called the collector. So you have your E, B, C's of transistors. Emitter, base, and collector. The base, power is coming in there on this one. The emitter is controlling it, just like the valve. And what comes out is a big copy. That is called an amplifier. Okay? So now we've taken this very small voltage in the microphone and turned it into a much bigger voltage. One thing they did with it is they figured out how to build speakers. Now you have this big voltage. All right? Speakers kind of like this in reverse. This time you have a north and south magnet, like in your speaker, and around it is a coil of wire that's attached to kind of a paper tube, and on the end of that we have the cone, on your speaker that moves back and forth. So now when we put energy in there, the coil of wire turns into a magnet, and it either pushes away from that magnet internally. There's a permanent magnet and there's an electromagnet. So it either pushes away from that magnet or it's attracted to it as the energy changes. And it vibrates back and forth the same way the electricity is coming in from here, which is the same kind of electricity that you made from your microphone. Make small electricity, make a bigger copy, put into something that moves a lot more air. And who is the first world leader to use this magnificent technology? Hitler. Then he didn't have to yell in the beer halls anymore. He could talk to 10,000 people at once because he had this incredible thing that could speak so loud. And therein, people, lies the danger of social media. That's why the aliens have already left. They're like, oh, they have nuclear weapons and social media. Check back in 1,000. Okay, so now we've gotten all the way up to electrical benefits to sound. So now we have a PA system, which stands for public address. Hey, you have a PA system? No, but we have a sound system. Thank you. PA system meant for public address. Preachers, dictators, everybody was having fun with it now. So we got up to that stage, and now we've turned physical sound energy into electrical energy, and we can now use it to do speakers. Next, recording. Recording electrical.